In 1959, 5,259 people lived on a concrete island you could walk across in 6 minutes. Hashima, 15 kilometers off Nagasaki, was among the most densely populated places on Earth, a vertical city with schools, a hospital, a cinema, and rooftop gardens, all built on bare rock. By April 1974, every single resident was gone. The city didn't decline, it was switched off. Before the concrete buildings rose, the site was simply a jagged basalt formation known locally as Hashima or Gunkanjima, the Battleship Island, due to its stark profile against the horizon. Resting in the East China Sea, this pre-industrial rock was a barren, wave-swept outpost rather than a conventional settlement. Measuring roughly 480 meters long by 160 meters wide, it offered no natural harbor, no protective vegetation, and no source of fresh water. Surrounded by deep ocean currents and battered by seasonal typhoons, this tiny, isolated footprint stood as a rigid physical boundary. Every system built on this reef had to work within these absolute physical limits. In 1990, Mitsubishi purchased this barren rock to extract the high-grade coking coal seams stretching deep beneath the seabed. Because miners could not commute to undersea shafts, the company had to house its workforce directly beside the mine. To expand the tiny footprint, workers constructed massive seawalls and reclaimed land, tripling the usable surface. Mitsubishi engineered the entire outpost as a single connected production system where housing, workspaces, and civic facilities were tightly integrated. By 1916, with no remaining horizontal space, builders completed Japan's first large-scale reinforced concrete apartment block. This design enabled the settlement to grow upward rather than outward, creating a vertical company town shaped entirely by the demands of coal extraction. With horizontal space exhausted, the island grew vertically. High-rise concrete apartment blocks rose directly from the reclaimed platforms, packing families into compact residential units of 12 to 15 square meters. Because these structures were so tightly compressed, individual apartments had to rely on shared circulation routes and collective plumbing systems. The massive concrete stairways, often measuring only 1.2 meters wide, functioned as the primary arteries of daily life. They served as the main conduits for household deliveries, coal mining shift changes, and casual public interaction, linking private quarters directly to the communal grid. Survival on this barren rock required engineering fresh water where none existed naturally. For decades, water had to be transported to the island by cargo vessels and stored in heavy catchment tanks. In 1957, Mitsubishi reportedly completed a submarine water pipeline, laying steel pipes across 6.5 kilometers of seabed from the mainland. While the exact engineering specifications of this underwater conduit await primary archival verification, the system provided reliable tap water through a centralized company-managed network. Electricity and sanitation operated under this same corporate utility structure. The company ran the diesel generators and managed the waste, ensuring the entire settlement functioned as a single, coordinated machine. Yet this apparently self-sufficient system remained entirely dependent on maritime supply chains. With no agricultural land, every bag of rice, cut of meat, and fresh vegetable had to arrive by ship from Nagasaki. When winter storms or typhoons prevented these vessels from docking, the vertical outpost faced immediate shortages, showing how a modern concrete fortress remained completely bound to mainland logistics. The high-rise concrete blocks functioned as a complete civic environment rather than simple industrial barracks. Miners, teachers, physicians, and shopkeepers lived side by side, organizing their daily routines around the mine's rotating 8-hour shifts. At the center of this community was a combined elementary and junior high school. Children attended classes in multi-story concrete blocks, their school days synchronized with the corporate whistle. Teachers lived alongside their students in the adjacent buildings, while a rooftop kindergarten sat on top of the massive Building 65. A central hospital managed the community's domestic continuity, handling births, childhood illnesses, and mining injuries. Away from the shafts, leisure was communal and closely knit. Residents gathered at the 300-seat cinema, met in local bathhouses where the water turned black with coal dust, and established rooftop vegetable gardens, hauling soil from the mainland to grow radishes and cabbage on the concrete roofs. Household economics were tied directly to company employment, with staple goods purchased from a co-op store where prices were regulated by a corporate committee. This extreme compression reached its peak in 1959, when a company's census recorded 5,259 residents on approximately 6.3 hectares of land. This population figure represented children, workers, and daily routines rather than an abstract density record. Before the economic pressures of the coming decades, the inhabited settlement functioned as a lived town, sharing civic, domestic, and service spaces in daily practice. Behind the domestic routines of the post-war peak lay a starkly different history of labor that shaped the island's physical expansion. Before the family apartments of the 1950s were filled, the social makeup of Hashima's workforce underwent drastic shifts. During the pre-war era, the colliery relied primarily on domestic Japanese miners. However, as military mobilization accelerated in the late 1930s, a severe labor shortage prompted Mitsubishi and the state to draw Korean and Chinese workers into the undersea shafts. Between 1939 and 1945, thousands of these workers arrived under wartime mobilization policies. While Japanese official records often classify these laborers under administrative terms like requisitioned, South Korean research and survivor testimonies describe a system of forced and coerced recruitment. Former Korean laborer Choi Jang-seop, who arrived on the island in 1943 at age 15, later recalled working in narrow coal faces, wearing only underwear, enduring constant threats of cave-ins, and surviving on sparse rations of sweet potatoes and beans. The human cost of this era remains a subject of intense historical dispute. Official Japanese wartime records state that just under 140 conscripted laborers died on Hashima. In contrast, South Korean government investigations and cremation records from the adjacent Nakanoshima Island suggest that approximately 1,300 laborers died during the war years from accidents, disease, and malnutrition. Following Japan's defeat in 1945, foreign workers were repatriated, and the post-war workforce became almost entirely Japanese. While families built a stable community in the 1950s, their experience coexisted with this legacy of exploitation, showing how the same concrete outpost served as both a social sanctuary and a site of forced labor. In the decades following the war, Japan's expanding economy began to reorient its entire power grid. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry actively promoted imported petroleum, causing coal's share of national energy production to drop from 45% in 1950 to just 20% by 1970. Beneath the seabed of Hashima, extraction grew increasingly difficult and expensive. Between 1968 and 1973, the colliery accumulated operating losses totaling 1.2 billion yen. Though high-grade coal still remained beneath the seabed, its national purpose had dissolved. On January 15, 1974, Mitsubishi executives announced the formal decision to close the mine. Without coal production, the corporate justification for supplying fresh water electricity, and food to this concrete outpost vanished, setting the evacuation in motion. In April 1974, the corporate shutdown order transformed the industrial outpost into an evacuation zone. Because essential utilities and food supplies were tied entirely to the colliery, habitation became physically impossible once the generators stopped. Over the next several weeks, scheduled ferries carried families, household goods, and the remnants of domestic life toward Nagasaki. School registers from these months document the swift collapse of the community, recording classes that dwindled to zero in a matter of days. With no alternative industry to sustain the settlement, the vertical city cleared systematically. Within 90 days of the announcement, every resident had departed. The high-rises remained intact on the basalt reef, but the shared kitchens, crowded stairwells, and synchronized routines that made them homes vanished. The physical remains of Hashima exist today as deteriorating structural evidence. Exposed to salt, wind, and typhoons, the concrete residential blocks are slowly collapsing. The surviving shaft infrastructure and defensive seawalls outline the old community's boundaries, yet the structures themselves do not record the lived experiences of those inside. In 2015, UNESCO inscribed the island under the sites of Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution. This designation focused on the engineering achievements of the undersea colliery, but it also intensified a long-standing historical dispute. Modern tourism branding emphasizes the stark battleship-like silhouette of the ruins. Yet behind the industrial narrative, a deep division remains over the representation of wartime labor. Japanese official interpretations, South Korean survivor organizations, and international historians continue to debate whether to frame the island as a triumph of modernization or a site of forced exploitation. Today, Hashima's concrete slowly crumbles into the sea, but its quiet ruins still demand an honest reckoning. The struggle is no longer over coal, but memory. Until we reconcile industrial triumph with the human cost of forced labor, the island remains a monument divided against itself.